Morning, everyone. Welcome to Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. Start from the global space. As usual, Chicago soybean futures fell on Thursday and hovered just about 3-year lows as the ongoing harvest in top producer Brazil poured cheap beans into an already well-supplied market. Corn futures rose their 5th straight daily gain from a 3-year low last week. But analysts say this is largely due to short covering by speculative investors and plentiful supply that will continue to pressure prices. Let's look at the prices there. We see that wheat is up 0.5% at $5.77 for half a bushel. Soybeans is down at lost 0.4% right there at $11.40 for 3/4 of a bushel. White corn gained 0.2% at $4.29 for half a bushel. Speculative investors are betting on further declines, especially on the CBOT, that has left market prone to episodes of short covering that push up prices. From there, we'll go to the oil space and see that prices eased early on Thursday after a larger than expected build in the United States crude stockpile stoked worries about slow demand, while signs that U.S. interest rates could remain elevated for a longer time also added to pressure. See what that has done to prices. It still retained the $83 that we had yesterday, but now it's $83.46 a barrel, and that's down 0.3%. WTI of the United States is still around the $78.24 a barrel after it lost 2%. That's a whole lot of drop, one might add. There we see that apart from that, stockpiles, we told you, that rose while gasoline and distillate inventories fell. Crude inventories rose for the 5th consecutive week. And now the focus for investors and traders is that U.S. personal consumption expenditure price index, which is expected. And we know that that will determine if the Fed will think of cutting rates anytime soon. Now, outside that, we see both Israel and Hamas have played down the prospect for a truce, and Qatari mediators have said that the most contentious issues are still unresolved. And this is in spite of the promise by President Biden that there will be a truce, at least even for the holiday, the Ramadan holiday. No assurance of that anytime soon. So we see prices are still battered. As supply is battered, then we see a flip side on prices. Now we come to Nigeria, where the African Import Bank, that's Afreximbank, says that it has become the largest financier of oil and gas projects in Africa. The bank made this known at the ongoing Nigeria International Summit in Abuja. According to Afreximbank, it has invested $30 billion in industry projects, with Nigeria as one of the biggest beneficiaries, accounting for almost 60%. That's about $18 billion of the total funding. And this is despite reduced global funding for hydrocarbon ventures in Africa. Meanwhile, President of Afreximbank, Professor Benedict Rama, says that Africa needs to find innovative solutions to its huge energy deficit. And the bank's move to manage the proposed Africa Energy Bank is one way to ensure that it has its best chance of success. And of course, I must add that energy transition is also one conversation going on there, because we cannot ignore that. Even though OPEC has said that Africa has prospects, huge prospects of growth in the oil and gas sector, it's also important that we do not turn our backs to energy transition, renewable energy, which is the way of the world now, especially when you look at the environmental consequences of fossil fuel, going on around the world. Now let's come to our currency, one of the most interesting issues, heartbreaking on the one side, and the other side just keeps you curious, and see the rate that closed, the way it closed yesterday. There we have the numbers for current, and especially these are the closing for yesterday, Wednesday. We saw that at NAFEM it closed at 1,609.51 kobo. Opened at 1,615 naira. So that's a drop of 0.40 NAFEX. And then the BDCs, we see it's lowest at the BDCs, and that's really curious, at this time, especially when we remember the conversation that the CBN governor said, as an MPC that was announced on Tuesday. We heard what he said was going to be stricter rules and all of that, so see now, BDC 1,450. But let's drill into this and a whole lot more, especially that ways and means. I actually missed that at the MPC. I was expecting the CBN governor to touch on that, but We didn't hear anything about Ways and Means at the MPC, and it's a major one. Good investigation and auditing is going on by the lawmakers. But anyway, let's delve into this with someone who's not afraid to say what he knows. Kelvin Emmanuel, he's a director of Obsidian Achena, Nigeria. Kelvin, good morning. Good to have you from Abuja. Normally we'll have you in the Abuja studio. Good to have you in Lagos.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much.
So first of all, I mean, this issue of currency, we see circulars from the CBN everywhere. Is it making any impact? Is it still early days? Or has the CBN shuffled, something that's supposed to be rested? There's a lot of uncertainty, actually.
Well, to be honest with you, I think it's early days, but it's my assessment that the central bank is in the right direction. They started with circulars, started coming in January, the all-in rates, which is the IE rates, and the second check, which is different between the all-in rates and a spread that the primary dealers sell in the market. And then they came with net open positions, 0% long and 20% short. And then they came with the BDCs, right?
The BDCs are the latest
now. The BDCs are the latest.
Or is it Binance?
Well, on the I know the Binance issue is a hot topic.
Very hot.
But I'll tell you that I don't know enough yet to comment on it. But I would say that Nigerians should give the government the benefit of doubt, considering that Binance has regulatory issues in different parts of the world. In America, they were fined $4.3 billion. In the UK, they are banned. In the Netherlands, they are banned. Quite a number of countries around the world, they are not allowed to operate. These governments must know something we don't. So I think, I know Nigerians have a very low trust threshold with the government. They don't trust the government. But on this particular issue, I think Nigerians should give the government the benefit of doubt. But I honestly believe that what Cardozo has done with the BDCs, trying to bring them into the fold instead of ban them completely, raise their capital requirements, have them provide directors, have them report, place a cap on how much transactions they can do, place a cap on how much non-cash transactions they can access, where they can access it from, is a master stroke. Because the proliferation of dark money and non-regulatory compliance of BDCs over time is one of the reasons why Nigeria is currently on the grey list by the Financial Action Task Force for AML and CFT.
Just the BDCs or the
banks? It's not just the BDCs.
The banks.
The banks.
Exactly.
But when you look at the ownership of the BDCs, most of the BDCs, nearly 6,000 of them, are owned by politically exposed persons and bankers. That's the reality of it. So is there a situation where money comes from primary dealers and then money goes to BDCs? And then there is the round tripping that we've always known that is contributed, not the major factor, but it's contributed to where we are in the currency market today. The answer is yes. So we cannot deny these realities that despite the fact that we have liquidity issues, the CBN still has $2.2 billion outstanding in forwards. The CBN has negative net reserves. I heard the governor of the central bank say at the MPC that the gross reserves are $34+ billion. That is gross. That is gross because he is not factoring the P&L. Based on P&L position, right now on revaluation losses that the CBN has negative net reserves. And currently as we speak, it's difficult for the CBN to conduct balance of payments, which is the reason why it's my belief that the government, especially with the coming trip that the president has to Qatar, needs to open a foreign support line for intra-central bank lending.
Okay, so talking about lending, the Ways and Means, I was really looking forward to, maybe a question from the journalist or even a comment from the CBN governor, because I know when they appeared as the CBN governor and the coordinating minister of the economy, when they appeared before the lawmakers, that was a major one. As we speak, I think they are auditing 30 billion of the former administration. And I wanted to know, is there a halt to Ways and Means? I read some report that until the federal government pays off the backlog, there's the auditing. So it's kind of unclear. What do you know about it? I know you're not in CBN.
So, the Ways and Means total about 30.6 trillion naira. And it violated Section 38 of the CBN Act by over 2,800%. The Section 38 says 5% of real revenues for the previous accounting year. When I did the numbers then, it was 5% came to anywhere between 450 and 500 million US dollars. But then they took it to 53 billion, which is one of the reasons why you saw M1 money supply shot up, and then you had cost push inflation. So there is excess of liquidity. So one of the things that the governor has done by CRR, which I think is an overreach, is trying to suck out liquidity through what they call M3 money supply from currency revaluation gains in capital and debt securities market out of the system. Okay? But what you have is last year, the 9th Senate, before they handed over the baton to the 10th Senate, hurriedly passed the securitization of the Ways and Means without an audit, considering that the governor of the central bank has confirmed that about 10 trillion naira that was collected, they collected it from private sector CRR, they raised CRR from 12 to 15%, then raised it to 32.5. Usually CRR is used as a means to manage liquidity and money supply in the system, but they now use it to fund the government. In my estimates, private and public sector CRR came to around 12 trillion. The remaining 17.5 to 18 trillion came from printing of money that they didn't have assets and reserves to back, which is one of the major drivers of the currency devaluation. The
governor also alluded to the 10 trillion naira for intervention funds as
exactly. So when you look at the fact that for programs like the Anchor Borrowers program, 1.4 trillion, they had, first it was the IMF that came out and raised the alarm that 74.5% of that money is impaired, which means that they are unable to recover it. And you couldn't see the impact on food production. Food inflation today is about 34%,
yes.
Right? You couldn't see the impact because if you pump in 1.4 trillion naira into production of food, we shouldn't have the inflation we have today. So there's a disconnect somewhere, and you have several intervention programs that you couldn't see the impact on the real economy on. Because what typically happens when you do quantitative easing is that the government swaps bonds for reserves, and they draw on the reserves, and they pump that money into the financial system. It's called financial money. If your production in the real sector does not pay enough taxes to equate the money you pump into the system, then you have a glut of cash in the system, and inflation goes up. That was what happened, So I expect that the new draft that they're proposing, the Chairman Senate Committee on Banking, Insurance and Financial Services, is proposing a 10% cap. 9th Senate raised to 15%. He's proposing they raise it back to 10%. He's also proposing something I think is a master stroke. He's proposing that Ways and Means to the federal government must not exceed 10% of previous year's real revenue. But more than that, he's saying that after 3 months of advancing the government has to pay back the money. And if they don't pay back the money, the federal government has to be debited from their FAC receipts through a hard stop, an ISPO, an irreversible standing payment order, that when FAC is paid, the federal government's share of FAC will be debited from source if they refuse to pay the money.
But that implementing that would be another thing. We could have it on paper, because it sounds like, there's no way the federal government can escape not paying the Ways and Means, especially after 3 months, or the one that has been owed. And we're still awaiting the result of the audit of the Bafeti, of the former administration. But the thing is, we always talk about the political will. We have it on paper, it can be taken from FAC, then the state governments will come to say, oh, if you touch FAC, you're going to affect my allocation. Then how do we handle things like that?
No. So, in fact, I had to check the legality of this particular clause that is being proposed by the Chairman Senate Committee on Banking when it was read to the Senate. I had to check the legality. It's saying that the federal government of Nigeria is the federal, state, and local governments. Yes? Now, take, for example, that a bank borrows 10 billion naira, and the bank tells the state government that before we sign off on giving you the 10 billion naira loan you want to use for your state, you're going to have to sign an irrevocable standing payment order. That order will be sent to FAC. As soon as your allocation is credited, we'll debit the payment from source. We'll not wait for you to willingly want to pay us, we'll debit it from source. So what they're saying is that the federal government has its own share of FAC, not states, not local government. The federal government share of FAC, when FAC allocation is credited, So you know it's 55, 29, 16. The federal government's 55% of FAC allocations will be debited from source. It's an ISPO. And an ISPO is a legal contract that is not reversible.
Okay, so we hope, we'll see. I mean, it's not yet a law. It hasn't gone through the processes yet. So we'll see how that ends. And of course, we need to follow the ways and means because it's a major contributor to inflation in the country.
Yes, it's a major contributor. And I'm surprised that not until 2021 or 2022, Nigerians didn't understand how ways and means contributed to the situation we have today with currency devaluation and inflation. And it's very important. It's very important because one of the other proposals that was made in this draft submission to the Senate floor, sections 50, that talks about audit and transmission of audit to National Assembly and publication of audit to Nigerians, that was not done for 7 years until 2023, okay? It says that if the central bank fails to do audit, to show its books, to show its positions, to comply with the CBN Act as amended, the president is obligated to remove the governor after he's reminded by National Assembly.
And I guess that's why they're talking about the tenure of the central bank governor now.
Which is very important. I actually support that proposal that the central bank governor should be a single tenure of 6 years. I think it's very important that CBN governors don't stay too long in the office, that they become too comfortable and become political.
All right, Kelvin Emmanuel, thank you so much. Director of CBN Achena, Nigeria. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.